Nobody expected what happened that morning outside the conference center. It started like one of those ordinary, predictable days. Cameras, press badges, a crowd of eager students lining up to attend Charlie Kirk's leadership seminar. But then, from the edge of the sidewalk, a voice, rough, angry, and tired, cut through the chatter. A homeless man, dark-skinned, wrapped in layers of worn fabric and defiance, stood there, glaring straight at Charlie. His sign read, "You preach hope while people like me sleep in the cold." You could feel the energy shift. The cameras that had been waiting for the seminar began to tilt toward the confrontation. And the moment they did, everyone assumed how this would go. The homeless man was emotional, angry, but the power imbalance was clear. This was Charlie Kirk, famous, clean-cut, wealthy, confident. And this man was invisible to society. Except Charlie didn't walk away. He didn't call security. He didn't tell the man to quiet down. Instead, he said quietly, "Tell me what you mean." Now that doesn't sound dramatic yet. But that moment, that tiny decision to listen, would set off a chain of events that exposed an uncomfortable truth about the city, about the people watching, and about what real leadership looks like. The homeless man laughed bitterly. "You don't want to hear what I mean. You people never do." Charlie's staff shifted nervously. One of them whispered, "Let's move inside, sir. He's just trying to get attention." But Charlie raised a hand. "No," he said, keeping his eyes on the man. "If he's right, I want to know why." And that's when things escalated. The man, whose name we'd later learn was Jerome, began to rant. He talked about politicians making promises they never kept, about motivational speakers charging thousands for advice that didn't fill an empty stomach, and about how people like him had been talked about their whole lives, but never talked to. The crowd murmured, some smirked, a few even clapped for Jerome. One voice shouted, "He's right, you don't know what it's like to struggle," and just like that the crowd turned. Charlie was being attacked publicly, humiliated in front of cameras and strangers by a man society would normally ignore. Every instinct told him to defend himself, to remind them of his background, his work, his success. But he didn't. He just asked one question. "Jerome, if you could tell this crowd what you want most right now, not in life, but right now, what would it be?" Jerome blinked. The question disarmed him. You could see it in his face. He wasn't ready to be treated like a person, like someone whose answer mattered. He hesitated, then muttered, "A hot meal, and for someone to look at me without pity." Charlie nodded slowly. "Then that's where we'll start." No one understood what he meant by that. But that one sentence, calm, deliberate, and almost defiant, was the beginning of something that would shock the entire city. Because over the next 48 hours, what looked like a humiliating viral moment would turn into one of the most transformative acts of compassion ever seen on camera. But before we get there, there's something you need to know. Something most people didn't about Charlie. He wasn't just another speaker or commentator. He had spent years studying behavioral psychology. Not for fame, but to understand what motivates people, especially those society overlooks. He believed that every human being, even at their lowest, still operates on three essential psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy, the need to feel in control of your own life. Competence, the need to feel capable, useful, or skilled. And relatedness, the need to feel connected and seen by others. Most motivational speeches, he believed, only touched the surface, telling people to believe in themselves without addressing how to rebuild those three core drives. That's why Jerome's outburst hit him so hard, because in those angry words, he heard someone whose psychological foundation had been shattered. So while everyone saw an insult, Charlie saw an opportunity, not to win an argument, but to rebuild a man. That night, instead of flying home after the seminar, Charlie did something no one expected. He asked his team to find Jerome. It took hours, searching shelters, underpasses, and street corners. Most people thought it was for PR, that Charlie wanted to film a charitable gesture to repair his image, but the cameras were off. He didn't tell anyone why. When they finally found Jerome, he was sitting under a flickering streetlight, sharing a paper cup of coffee with another man. Charlie approached quietly, knelt beside him, and said, "You said you wanted a meal. Come with me." Jerome looked at him skeptically. "You gonna take pictures of it?" Charlie shook his head. "No cameras. Just dinner." And here's where the story gets deeper, because this wasn't charity. Charlie wasn't just feeding a man, he was testing a belief. He wanted to know, can dignity be restored by a single act of listening if it's followed by action? At the restaurant, Charlie didn't talk about himself. He didn't lecture. He asked questions, real ones, about Jerome's life, his work, what went wrong. And in those answers, a pattern emerged. One that would later become the backbone of Charlie's biggest public project ever. Jerome had once worked as a carpenter. He built furniture for 15 years before losing his job when the factory shut down. The savings disappeared. His apartment was gone. One medical bill later, and the spiral began. From couch surfing to shelters to the streets. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't broken. He was just discarded by a system that measured value by productivity, not potential. By the end of that meal, Charlie said something that would later be quoted on headlines nationwide. "Jerome, I can't fix the world, but I can fix your tomorrow. And if tomorrow works, we'll fix the next one." That was the start of what people would later call the 7-day experiment. But what nobody knew yet, not Jerome, not the cameras that would soon swarm them, was that Charlie had a plan far bigger than just helping one man. He was about to challenge the entire concept of what help means in America. And by the end of the week, the same people who had mocked him online would be begging to volunteer. By morning, the story had exploded online. A shaky cell phone video of the confrontation had been uploaded to Twitter with the caption, "Homeless man destroys Charlie Kirk in public. Watch how he reacts." Within hours, millions had seen it. The comments were brutal. He finally got humbled. "Guess money can't buy empathy. All talk, no heart." They didn't know the full story yet. They didn't see the dinner, the listening, the promise. Charlie's PR team panicked. They wanted him to release a statement, something like, "I support the homeless community and will be making a donation." But Charlie refused. "If I talk now, they'll think it's for the cameras. Let's show them instead." That phrase, "show them instead," would soon become the mantra for everything that followed. While the internet argued, Charlie and Jerome were sitting at a small diner booth the next morning, planning something extraordinary. "Jerome," Charlie said, "what if we built something together?" Jerome frowned. "Like what? You want to hire me as your mascot now?" "No," Charlie said simply. "I want you to teach me what the streets taught you." Jerome leaned back, suspicious. "The streets don't teach lessons worth learning." Charlie shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. The streets teach survival, resourcefulness, judgment. They teach you how people really live when all the systems fail." He paused, then added, "And I want to turn that into a curriculum." Jerome blinked. "A what?" "A program," Charlie explained, "that helps people rebuild their lives. Starting from the mindset of survival, not success. You can't teach someone about financial literacy if they haven't eaten. You can't talk about ambition to someone who hasn't been listened to. So we'll start small, a 1-week project." Jerome chuckled, half disbelieving. "You serious?" "Dead serious. 7 days. You teach me how to live like you do, with nothing. And I'll show you how to build something from it." Now, at this point, Charlie's team thought he'd lost his mind. He canceled his next few events, told the press he'd be unavailable, and moved into a small, run-down apartment on the city's west side, right next to Jerome. No staff, no security, just him, a backpack, and a challenge to survive 7 days on the same conditions Jerome lived with every day. The rules were simple. No money except what Jerome earned. No car. No help from friends or family. And most importantly, everything had to be filmed by Jerome, not by Charlie's crew. It wasn't a stunt. It was documentation. On day one, the footage was raw. They spent the morning collecting bottles for recycling. Jerome showed him how to pick the ones with the highest refund value, how to negotiate quietly with shop owners, and how to avoid other collectors who guarded their territories. By noon, they had earned $6.40. Jerome grinned, holding up the crumpled bills. Now that's what survival looks like. Charlie smiled back, exhausted. Then tomorrow we build from this. But online, the backlash only grew. People accused him of exploiting the homeless for attention. A popular YouTuber even posted a video titled "Charlie Kirk's Fake Poverty Experiment is Disgusting." It didn't matter. Charlie didn't respond. He stayed focused on Jerome. By day 3, something began to change. Jerome, once looked like a man drifting through the world, started talking about ideas. Not just complaints or regrets, but ideas. He told Charlie how most shelters treated homeless people like problems to manage instead of people to rehabilitate. How the constant lack of control made people angrier, more hopeless, and how sometimes help felt more like surveillance. Charlie wrote everything down. "You're describing something powerful," he said. "A system designed for survival, not growth. What if we flipped that?" Jerome laughed. "Flipped it? You can't flip the system, you are the system." Charlie didn't respond right away. He just said quietly, "Not for long." By day 5, Jerome began noticing subtle things about Charlie. How he asked strangers questions no one usually asked, like, "What do you need most that money can't buy?" How he took notes on every small act of kindness they witnessed, as if cataloging what humanity looked like in its rawest form. And on that 5th night, under a bridge near the river, Jerome finally asked, "Why are you really doing this? Is this some redemption story for you?" Charlie looked at him for a long moment. "Because I've spent my life talking about solutions from stages," he said. "But I've never lived inside the problem. Until I do, everything I say is theory." Jerome studied him, searching for deceit, but found none. That night they shared a loaf of bread, and Jerome said something that broke the silence. "You know, nobody's ever asked me to teach them before." Charlie smiled. "That's because you're the professor in the wrong classroom." By day 7, the world's attention had shifted again. Someone had leaked the footage. The real footage, showing Charlie sleeping under bridges, working side by side with Jerome, helping other homeless men repair a broken heater at a shelter using scrap parts. Suddenly, the same internet that mocked him began to reconsider. Clips spread everywhere. Humber's 7-day experiment began trending. One tweet summed it up perfectly. He didn't post statements. He didn't defend himself. He showed up. But what came next would be the true shock. Not the week itself, but what Charlie did after. He held a press conference. Not at a hotel, not in a studio, but right in the middle of the same street where Jerome had first insulted him. Reporters were everywhere. The homeless community gathered around, curious. Charlie stepped up to the mic and said, "A man told me I preach hope without understanding hunger. He was right. So we built something new." He turned to Jerome. "Tell them what we built." Jerome stepped forward, nervous but proud. "It's called Rebuild 7, a project where people like me teach people like him how to survive the system, while they teach us how to beat it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone asked, "How does it work?" Charlie replied, "For 7 days, a volunteer lives under the same conditions as someone experiencing homelessness. They work together to build something tangible. A job application, a resume, a small business idea, even just a plan. At the end, both people walk away changed." He paused. "It's not charity, it's partnership." The press conference ended in applause, but the real story was only beginning. Because within 24 hours, Rebuild 7 had 10,000 volunteer applications. Universities, churches, companies, everyone wanted in. But behind all the excitement, there was one unresolved tension. Jerome didn't believe it would last. He told Charlie privately, "They'll forget about this in a week. They always do." Charlie looked him dead in the eye and said, "Then we'll build something they can't forget." And what he did next, in the following month, would shock not just Jerome, but the entire nation. Because Charlie was about to challenge the most powerful myth about homelessness in America, that it's an individual failure instead of a structural one. And he was going to prove it, live on camera. Within a month, Rebuild 7 had gone from a small pilot project on a single street to a nationwide movement. But with success came backlash, and not from the people anyone expected. At first, the program seemed harmless. A few volunteers sleeping outdoors with homeless participants, learning survival tactics, and helping each other rebuild their lives. It was touching, even inspirational. But as the data came in, it revealed something the public wasn't ready to face. Over 80% of participants who completed Rebuild 7 didn't return to the streets. They found jobs. They reconnected with family. Some even started micro-businesses. And the reason shocked everyone. It wasn't just the help, it was the partnership. When you give someone the chance to teach, you restore their dignity. When you let them contribute instead of just receive, the human brain resets its sense of identity and worth. Charlie explained this in an interview that went viral. You don't rebuild a person by giving them a bed. You rebuild them by giving them a purpose. That one line started a storm. Government agencies, nonprofits, and even corporate sponsors began to question their own methods. If Charlie's approach worked, what did that say about billions of dollars spent on programs that didn't? The pressure mounted. Politicians called his model reckless and unsustainable. News anchors accused him of simplifying a complex issue for fame. But the truth was, Charlie didn't care about being right. He cared about being effective. Behind the scenes, Jerome noticed something strange about him. Despite the chaos, Charlie was calm. Every attack, every smear campaign, he handled with precision, as if he had already anticipated it. One night, Jerome asked, "You don't seem surprised by any of this. Did you plan for them to come after you?" Charlie smiled faintly. "I knew the system would defend itself. It always does. But the difference is, this time, it's on camera." He wasn't wrong. Every time a journalist attacked the program, the internet responded with footage of lives being changed. A former addict standing beside the volunteer who helped her open a bakery. A man who'd been homeless for 14 years now running a mentorship center. The narrative was shifting, and powerful people didn't like it. By the third month, donations started drying up. City officials revoked permits. Some corporate partners quietly pulled out, claiming ethical concerns. But Charlie had already prepared for that. He revealed that Rebuild 7 didn't rely on donations. It was partially funded by a closed-loop microcredit system. Here's how it worked. Each pair, the volunteer and the homeless partner, built a small project over 7 days. If it generated any income, even as little as $20, that money went into a shared community pool. The pool then financed the next participant's week. It was a self-sustaining chain of transformation. No outside donors, no dependency, no red tape. Jerome was stunned when he found out. "You built an economy inside the movement?" Charlie nodded. "Because if they can build something small here, they can build something bigger out there." But the more effective it became, the more dangerous it looked to those in power. An anonymous memo leaked from a city official's office described Rebuild 7 as a potential destabilizing movement that reframes poverty as a solvable design flaw rather than an inevitable condition. The media pounced. They accused Charlie of undermining trust in public institutions. For the first time, he hesitated. Not because of fear, but because he realized something deeper was happening. The more he tried to help, the more resistance he faced. And yet, that resistance revealed what he had suspected all along. The problem wasn't the people. It was the machinery built to manage them. That night, as the backlash reached its peak, Charlie met Jerome on the rooftop of their small headquarters. Below them, volunteers packed boxes of supplies for the next batch of participants. Jerome handed him a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Rebuild 7 under investigation for financial misconduct." Charlie sighed, reading it silently. They're scared, he said. Jerome frowned. Scared of what? Feeding people? Charlie turned to him. No, scared of losing control. Because when people learn they can change their lives without permission, they stop being manageable. Jerome stared at him. You sound like you've fought this battle before. And that's when Charlie finally revealed part of the truth. Years ago, before his rise to fame, he had been part of a federal pilot program on community economics, an experiment meant to test whether small-scale empowerment could reduce poverty faster than welfare. It worked. But when the results threatened existing budgets, it was shut down. Charlie had never forgotten that. And Rebuild 7 was his quiet revenge, a living proof of concept that couldn't be buried by bureaucracy this time because it belonged to the people. Jerome listened in silence, then said softly, "You're not just trying to help us. You're trying to change the system." Charlie nodded, "And they'll do anything to stop it. But that's okay, because by the end of this, everyone will see what's really broken." The next morning, federal agents raided the Rebuild 7 headquarters. Cameras captured everything. Boxes being seized, volunteers being questioned, and Charlie standing calmly with his hands in his pockets. When reporters shouted questions, he said only one thing. "You can take the files. You can't take the proof. It's already in the people." The clip went viral. Within days, the investigation backfired. Former participants, hundreds of them, began posting their stories online with the hashtag #WeAreTheProof. A young woman wrote, "I was homeless for 2 years. Now I'm a project manager because of Rebuild 7. They didn't just give me a place to sleep, they gave me a reason to wake up." The hashtag became a movement of its own. News outlets scrambled to keep up. Some tried to discredit the stories, but the evidence was overwhelming. Lives were being rebuilt faster than traditional programs had ever managed. And that's when the real twist began to unfold. Because as the government's investigation collapsed, a new revelation surfaced. A leaked document showed that one of the largest private contractors responsible for managing homeless shelters in the state had been lobbying against Rebuild 7. Their reason? Sustained success in self-rehabilitation models reduces long-term funding justification. In other words, helping people too effectively was bad for business. The public erupted. Protests began. Donations surged again. But through it all, Charlie stayed quiet. He didn't gloat. He didn't take credit. He simply said, "Jerome started this with an insult. He called me out. Now the whole country is calling itself out." Still, Jerome wasn't convinced it would last. He'd seen hope come and go before. And that lingering doubt, that belief that systems always win, would become the emotional core of what came next. Because Charlie was about to show him something that would change not just his faith in humanity, but his understanding of himself. What Charlie did next wasn't just an expansion, it was a revelation, one that would expose a secret about Jerome's past, and the hidden connection that brought their lives together long before that first confrontation. And by the end of that reveal, the meaning of Rebuild 7 would never be the same again. The storm outside the Rebuild 7 headquarters had finally quieted. But inside, something else was brewing. Something more personal, more dangerous than the media or the government ever could be. Jerome had been distant since the raid. He showed up late, barely spoke, and spent hours staring at the wall where the old photos of the early participants hung. Charlie noticed, but didn't push. He knew that kind of silence, the kind that hides pain, not anger. One evening, as the two sat alone, Jerome finally said, "You keep talking about rebuilding systems, but tell me something. What if the system that broke you isn't out there? What if it's in here?" He tapped his chest. Charlie didn't answer immediately. He just leaned forward. "You're talking about guilt." Jerome's voice cracked a little. "I'm talking about a past that won't let me breathe." And then, slowly, painfully, the truth began to come out. Years ago, before the cardboard signs and cold nights, Jerome wasn't homeless. He was a construction foreman, a good one, married, 2 kids. One night, while working a late shift, a scaffolding collapsed. A worker died. Jerome had warned management the structure was unstable, but they ignored him. When the investigation began, the company pinned the blame on him. He fought it, lost everything: his job, his family, his reputation. And the most painful part, the company he worked for had been funded by one of the corporate initiatives Charlie's early economic policies had supported years back. Jerome didn't know it then. Charlie didn't either. But the connection between them, the reason that confrontation had felt fated, was that they were both victims of the same broken system. When Jerome finished speaking, there was nothing but silence. The kind that changes everything. Charlie finally said softly, "That's why you were angry that day." Jerome nodded, eyes red. "You represented everything that destroyed me. You stood there in your suit, talking about hard work and self-reliance, and I wanted to make you feel what I felt. Powerless." Charlie stared at him, grief in his face, but no defensiveness. "And you did," he said. "You made me realize what I'd never seen, that good intentions don't erase bad outcomes. I helped design systems that worked on paper, but hurt people in practice." Jerome looked away. "So what now? You gonna fix it with a hashtag?" Charlie shook his head. "No, I'm going to give you the power to fix it." Jerome blinked. "What?" Charlie stood and walked to the desk. He pulled out a folder, thin, worn, and sealed with a single strip of tape. "You once said no one would ever trust you again. You were wrong." He slid the folder across the table. Jerome opened it. Inside were legal documents, transfer papers. Rebuild 7's ownership was being turned over to a new nonprofit foundation. The director's name on the document, Jerome Miller. Jerome froze. "What is this?" "It's yours," Charlie said. "Rebuild 7 can't belong to me. If it does, it dies with my reputation. It has to belong to the people it's meant to serve. You'll lead it." Jerome's voice trembled. "You're serious?" Charlie nodded. "Dead serious. I'll stay on the board. I'll help with funding. But from now on, you're the face. You're the proof that the system can change from the inside." Jerome slammed the folder shut. "You can't just hand me this. I'm not you. I don't have your education, your network. You have what I don't," Charlie interrupted. "Credibility, experience, the kind of scars people believe. You're the voice I never was." Jerome fell silent. His hands trembled as he stared at the folder. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and steady, tapping the windows like the world was holding its breath. Charlie looked out at it and said, almost to himself, "You know, every time I talk about reform, people say change takes years. But when I met you, I realized change takes 1 second. The second you decide someone deserves better." Jerome swallowed hard. "You really think people will listen to me?" Charlie smiled faintly. "They already are. They just don't know it yet." The next morning, Jerome didn't show up. Charlie assumed he needed space, but by afternoon, calls started flooding in. Jerome's name was trending online again, this time with a video. It showed him standing in front of City Hall, holding up the Rebuild 7 documents, shouting to a crowd of homeless citizens and volunteers. "This is no longer a program. This is a movement. They can shut down our buildings, but they can't shut down us." The crowd roared. It was the speech of a lifetime. Raw, fiery, human. And the irony? The same people who had once ignored Jerome on the streets were now chanting his name. But later that day, tragedy struck. As Jerome left the rally, a car swerved off the road near the intersection, an accident caused by a hit and run. Jerome was hit. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but the damage was critical. By nightfall, he was gone. When Charlie got the call, he didn't speak. He just sat at his desk, staring at the rain-soaked window. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and silver. Within hours, the internet lit up again. Jerome Miller, #rebuild, he was the proof. People shared clips of his speech, his laughter, his lessons. But Charlie didn't post anything. Not yet. He knew what he had to do first. 2 days later, he called a press conference, the biggest one yet. Cameras from every network filled the plaza. When he walked to the podium, you could feel the weight in the air: grief, anger, confusion. He began softly, A man once told me that preaching hope without understanding hunger is hypocrisy. He was right. And that man changed my life. He paused. The crowd was silent. His name was Jerome Miller. And before he died, he built something I could never build, a movement rooted in truth. Rebuild 7 isn't mine anymore. It's his, and now it's yours. He held up a document, Jerome's signed copy, the one they'd both touched that last night. Starting today, the Rebuild 7 Foundation will operate under community leadership. No board of executives, no government oversight, just people rebuilding people. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Charlie wasn't done. And for those who said this wouldn't last, I promised I'd show them something they couldn't forget. So here it is. We've set aside funds to launch 700 micro centers across the country, each one led by someone who's lived the struggle firsthand. This isn't charity, it's revolution, powered by experience. The plaza erupted, and in that moment, in the same city where a homeless man had once insulted him, Charlie stood tall, not as a victim of public opinion, but as the architect of something unstoppable. Still, as he stepped away from the podium, there was one more secret no one knew. Something Charlie had discovered in Jerome's hospital file that morning, a detail that shattered him quietly, completely. Jerome's emergency contact, listed years ago on his records, was Charlie's father. Which meant that long before the movement, before the argument on the street, before everything, their lives had been connected by a forgotten act of kindness. Decades earlier, Charlie's father had once sponsored a young man through a workforce reentry program. That man was Jerome. He never knew it. Jerome never knew it. But destiny had brought them back together, the son of the man who'd once helped, now helping the man who'd been lost. And that realization, that invisible thread, would change everything Charlie did next. Because from that day forward, Rebuild 7 wasn't just about rebuilding systems. It was about rebuilding legacies. The world didn't move on after Jerome's death. For once, it paused. News channels replayed his final speech on loop. Influencers who had mocked Charlie's initiatives now posted tributes. And the people Jerome had once slept beside under bridges began marching in the streets, holding candles, chanting his name. Across the country, something was shifting. It wasn't pity, it was power. Charlie spent those first days in silence, not out of shock, but out of respect. He stayed in the same office, surrounded by Jerome's, handwriting on whiteboards, his half-drunk coffee cups still by the window. He couldn't bring himself to erase any of it. Then, 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the Rebuild 7 headquarters. No return address, just a single name in thick marker. For Charlie. Inside was a letter, typed but shaky, clearly written by Jerome before his final rally. If you're reading this, it means I finally got through to them. I told you once you can't fix a system from the top. You didn't listen. Not until you had to. But that's okay. Because you listened in the end. So don't mourn me, build for me, and when they tell you it's impossible, tell them Jerome already proved otherwise. Charlie read it once, then again, and on the third reading he noticed something scribbled at the bottom, in pen, almost like an afterthought. P.S. I found your dad's name in my old sponsor files last month. Crazy world, huh? He exhaled shakily. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. It was legacy calling. That night, Charlie did something he hadn't done in years. He went live. No script, no studio lights, just a dim office, a laptop camera, and the sound of rain tapping the window again. The same as the night he'd first met Jerome. He looked directly into the lens and said, "You've all heard about Jerome Miller. You've seen the clips. But what you don't know is that he wasn't supposed to meet me that day. He wasn't supposed to change my life. But he did. And now it's time for me to change yours." He leaned forward. His voice grew steadier. Rebuild 7 isn't just a project anymore. It's a promise. And starting tonight, we're expanding to every city in America. Not with government grants, not with investors, but with you. He pointed at the camera. If you've ever felt forgotten, this is your proof that you're not. Jerome died for that proof. So now, it's our job to make it mean something. The stream exploded. Millions of views within hours. People donated, volunteered, built chapters. By the end of the week, the Jerome Miller Foundation, powered by Rebuild 7, became the fastest-growing social initiative in the country. Within a month, microcenters began opening in cities like Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, and St. Louis. Each one followed Jerome's original blueprint, a two-room facility where food, education, and microcredit access combined into a single ecosystem. Each one led by someone who had lived through homelessness, incarceration, or systemic loss. And at the heart of every location hung a single photograph. Jerome, standing in front of City Hall, holding that folder. Underneath, engraved in metal, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. Charlie spent the next year traveling city to city, speaking at openings, helping set up chapters. But what mattered most weren't the speeches. It was the faces. The volunteers who used to be clients. The kids who used to beg on those streets now handing out flyers for new programs. It wasn't charity anymore. It was transformation. And the irony? The same politicians who had once ridiculed him were now attending ribbon cuttings, pretending they had supported the idea all along. Charlie didn't correct them. He didn't need to. He wasn't fighting for credit anymore. He was fighting for continuity. But there was one moment, one quiet, forgotten morning, when all of it came full circle. It was in a small town outside Omaha. The Rebuild 7 branch there had just opened, and Charlie arrived unannounced, no media, no cameras. He walked inside, greeted by the smell of coffee and the laughter of children attending a literacy class. A volunteer recognized him instantly. "Mr. Kirk, wait here." She disappeared for a second, then returned holding a small dusty box. "Someone dropped this off for you months ago," she said. "Said you'd know what to do with it." Inside the box was a photo, faded and sun-worn. It showed two men in construction gear, smiling awkwardly at the camera. One of them was Charlie's father, the other was Jerome, decades younger, standing proudly beside a newly built foundation. On the back of the photo, written in pencil, "The beginning of something that would outlive both of us." Charlie's throat tightened. He sat down, staring at the photo until his eyes blurred. And then he whispered the words Jerome had once said. "You can't fix a system from the top." He slipped the photo into his pocket. "But you can rebuild it from the ground up." Outside, the town bell rang, a soft, distant chime over the hum of activity. Charlie stood up, adjusted his jacket, and smiled faintly. "All right, Jerome," he said quietly. "Let's get back to work." It was exactly 1 year to the day since Jerome Miller's death. The sun was just beginning to rise over Washington, D.C., streaking the sky with pale gold as a crowd gathered outside the National Mall. Cameras rolled, journalists whispered, and thousands of people stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for something they didn't quite understand, but felt deeply connected to. Behind the stage, Charlie Kirk stood alone. He was older now, not in years, but in weight, the kind of weight that only truth brings. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a plain black jacket with the Rebuild 7 insignia stitched on the chest. In his hand, he held Jerome's photo, the same one from the box in Omaha. A stage manager approached nervously. "We're live in 60 seconds. Charlie nodded. He didn't say a word. He stepped onto the platform as the crowd erupted, but he didn't wave. He didn't bask. He simply waited for the noise to die down. Then calmly, he began. "1 year ago, a man named Jerome Miller changed my life. Some of you remember him as a protester, some as a dreamer, some just as a face in a viral video. But to me, and to millions of you, he became something far greater. He became proof that you don't need to be powerful to change the world. You just need to care enough to start." The crowd fell silent. When I met Jerome, I thought I was helping him. But the truth is, He helped me. He opened my eyes to a truth most of us avoid because it's uncomfortable. That we've built a society where some people are invisible until they die trying to be seen. He held up the photo. Jerome didn't die a homeless man. He died a builder. And today, his blueprints, his ideas, his courage have built over 300 centers across the country. Every one of them a reminder that compassion isn't charity. It's justice. Applause rippled through the crowd. Not loud, but steady, like the beating of a single heart. And today, Charlie continued, we take the next step. Behind him, the screen lit up with the words, Rebuild 7, Global Initiative. We're no longer just rebuilding cities, Charlie said. We're rebuilding the human connection itself. This year, our team will launch the first rebuild centers overseas, in Nairobi, in Mumbai, in Sao Paulo, because poverty isn't local, injustice isn't American, and hope belongs to everyone. The crowd cheered now louder, rising in waves. But Charlie raised his hand gently and the noise faded again. Before I finish, there's something I haven't shared, something Jerome wrote to me before he died. He unfolded a small, worn piece of paper. Jerome's last letter. He said, don't mourn me, build for me, and that's exactly what we've done. But there was one more line at the bottom. It said, I found your dad's name in my old sponsor files. Crazy world, huh? A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Charlie's voice wavered slightly, just once. My father was a construction worker. He died when I was 14. I never knew much about his life, or the people he helped. But what I learned from that letter is that years before Jerome ever met me, my father helped him get clean. Paid for his rehab. Got him his first job on a construction site. Gasps rippled through the audience. Charlie smiled faintly, looking out into the horizon. So in a way, this wasn't a story about two strangers meeting by chance. It was a story about a promise passed from one man to another. Across time, across struggle, across everything that divides us. He looked down, then back up at the crowd. My father lifted Jerome. Jerome lifted me. And now it's my turn to lift you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. He took one last breath, then said quietly, if you've ever doubted your purpose, remember this. The smallest act of kindness can echo across generations. You may not live to see the change you start, but if you begin it, you've already changed the world. He placed Jerome's photo on the podium. The cameras zoomed in. Behind him, thousands of people raised candles, holding them high, not in mourning, but in honor. And as the first light of morning broke over the mall, it caught the edge of those flames, scattering them like tiny stars across a sea of faces. Charlie looked out at them all. The CEOs, the workers, the homeless, the students. And for a moment, there was no hierarchy, no ideology, no class, just humanity. He whispered, almost to himself, This is the America Jerome dreamed of. Then he stepped back, hands folded, and let the applause swell. Not for him, but for what they had built together. As the crowd chanted Jerome's name, the broadcast camera panned upward, catching the sunlight as it flared across the monument behind him. A fitting symbol, one man's shadow stretching across a nation reborn. That night, news anchors called it the speech that healed a divide. But Charlie didn't stay to watch the coverage. He was already gone, traveling quietly to another small town, another forgotten neighborhood, another foundation yet to be rebuilt. Because the work wasn't finished. Because Jerome's words still echoed in his mind. You can't fix a system from the top. Charlie smiled as his car disappeared down the quiet rural road. But you can rebuild it from the ground up. And for the first time in a long time, the world seemed ready to help him do it.